reality of phantoms and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it. Hey, good evening, folks, and welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio, where we explore and discuss the unknown and the unexplained. I'm your host, Lon Strickler, coming to you live here on YouTube. Thanks for joining me. Now, the Phantoms and Monsters Radio channel is made possible by you clicking the subscribe button and by you sharing our programming. Super chat donations are essential for us to continue offering you our unique content. Your consideration is very much needed and appreciated. So tonight, our friend and colleague Ken Gerhard is joining us as he has offered to answer your questions about cryptids. Now, Ken is a cryptozoologist and field investigator for the Center for Fortean Zoology, as well as a fellow of the Pangea Institute and consultant for various research groups. He has investigated reports of cryptids and mysterious animals around the world, including Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, Mothman, Thunderbirds, and Werewolves. In addition to co-hosting the History Channel series Missing in Alaska, he has appeared on 3 episodes of television series MonsterQuest that was on the History Channel. It was featured in the History Channel special, The Real Wolfman. Gerhard's other appearances include Ancient Aliens on the History Channel, Legend Hunters and Travel Channel, The Unexplained Files on the Science Channel, Paranatural on National Geographic, True Monsters on History Channel, Weird or What with William Shatner, Monsters and Mysteries in America, True Supernatural, which was on Destination America as well, and Ultimate Encounters truTV, Monster Project, and The Shipping Wars on A&E. His credits include appearances on several news broadcasts, Coast to Coast AM and Ireland's News Talk, as well as being featured in various books, DVDs, and articles by the Associated Press, Houston Chronicle, and the Tampa Tribune. Ken has contributed to trade publications, including Fate Magazine, Animals and Men, Cryptid Culture, the Journal for British Columbia Science, Cryptozoology Club, and Bigfoot Times. And he currently lectures and exhibits at events across the United States. So, Ken, thanks again for coming on this evening.
Good evening, Lon. Hey, Lon.
It's always great having you on here, man.
Man, we've known each other a long time, brother. I think that's one of my vintage bios. You know, maybe not too old, but takes me back to like a little bit of our history here.
Yeah,
a lot of these interviews, they've been fun.
Well, you know, you're doing so much. I can understand why it's hard to update stuff like that. But you know, and you have been busy. You know, the last time you were on here, and I think we were talking about the Loch Ness book you had written.
Yeah,
and you had mentioned at the end of the show that you were getting involved in an investigation in Northern California of these giant salamanders. So I hadn't really heard a whole lot about it. I had people asking me about it. So can you tell me a bit about what you came across and if you discovered anything?
Yeah. Well, you know, and just to reiterate what we talked about, you know, the giant salamander mystery is kind of one of those hidden nuggets in the field of cryptozoology a lot of people haven't heard about, unless you've read a lot of the classic Bigfoot literature, like books by Ivan Sanderson and John Green and some of those guys, because they would sometimes, when they were searching for Bigfoot in Northern California, they would hear these other stories about these monstrous salamanders that were said to be like 5 to 8 or 9 feet long, which of course is larger than any known species. In North America, we have the hellbenders up in the east. Those are, you know, maybe 2 or 3 foot long. Those are cryptid branks, the types of salamanders. And in Asia and China, they have some big 5-footers. But anyways, so there have been expeditions through the years, but none recently. And it started out as kind of a discussion on I think on a Bigfoot Facebook page where someone brought up giant salamanders. Oh, it was Jamie Wayne of the Bluff Creek Project, who's out there in Northern California. And we a few of us started talking about it. And we're like, well, let's go look for them. So July of this last year, we went up there. We were partially sponsored by Lauren Coleman and the International Cryptozoology Museum. Lauren, of course, is a huge fan of Tom Slick and all things cryptozoology. And I think it was always kind of something he wanted to be involved in as well. Jamie Wayne was he was our facilitator and was amazing. He's from that area. He found a great location for us, which is in the Trinity National Forest, which was, basically where a lot of these sightings came from. And so we found a camp, and I went out there with a team of 3 guys from Texas and Oklahoma. And it was Daniel Allen Jones, who's kind of an all-around Fortean investigator and videographer, and Jim Whitehead, who's a biologist and Bigfoot researcher from Oklahoma, and Jason Concy, who's a Bigfoot researcher and elephant handler, and handler of other exotic animals here from Texas. So we all went up there, and it was an amazing drive. It was like a 30-hour drive from Texas, which was beautiful. But anyways, we found the camp. We had lots of gadgets, several underwater cameras, including like a little ROV submarine with a camera on it. We utilized different, we were working basically the Trinity River. A lot of these waterways are interconnected up there in the mountains, but it's pristine habitat. I mean, it's old growth forest, no logging or development ever. These forests are like hundreds of years old. So it's pretty sweet. And these fast-running rivers that are basically running down the mountains, they're cold, they're shallow, lots of rocks, and those are salamander habitats for aquatic salamanders. So I actually consulted with a conservation biologist who does salamander surveys in Asia and other places, actually a couple. And we found out that, the best way to look for these giant salamanders is basically just to wade through the creeks and stick your arm under a rocky ledge or in a because these things hide in holes and pockets.
Yeah,
it's kind of like noodling. If any of your listeners out there are from Oklahoma or the South, so we had nets, and we did pretty extensive. Our ultimate goal was to make it up to this place called White's Lake, which was actually called Hubbard Lake at one time, and it's pivotal in this giant salamander story. It's been claimed that this guy saw like a whole bunch of these huge salamanders in this lake, and we made it as far as White's Creek, which runs off of that lake, but it would have been another 8 or 9 miles through some pretty treacherous habitat. And we had some logistical issues, restraints, I should say. Only so much time, and it can only cover so much ground. But we did learn a lot about these giant salamander accounts. Many of them date from the 1920s, 40s, and 50s, so they're very old. But some of the locals there in that area that spoke to the Native American people, and you have the Hoopa tribe is primary up there, and also I think the Yurok tribe have legends of what they call the Long Ones, which are described as these aquatic monsters or mythical animals that are very long and slender, and that could certainly represent these giant salamanders. So,
wow.
And there have been a few sort of quasi-modern sightings in the early 2000s and stuff. One guy who's actually claimed he's seen one of these things is M.K. Davis, the analyzer of Bigfoot videos. He was up there doing a Bigfoot project and claimed he saw this huge salamander that I think he said it was like 3 feet long. But so that's it in a nutshell. We didn't find any monster salamanders. We did finally manage to find some local species that are known about. One is the Pacific giant salamander, which is, they can get to be like a foot long. Maybe there are stories of them getting up to 18 inches long. So, they're, for a salamander, they're impressive, but not cryptid, unfortunately. So that was pretty much it. And then the the cherry on top of the cake was, and by the way, we did videotape and document the whole thing. So we've got a lot of footage, but we've just never had time to, that's on our bucket list there, is to try to put a video together so people can kind of see how the expedition went.
Cool.
But the cherry on top of the cake was that we got to visit Willow Creek, of course, and the China Flat Bigfoot Museum and see all the famous Bigfoot statues and locations in that town. But on the very last weekend, we got to join up with other researchers at Bluff Creek and basically visited the film site for the Patterson-Gimlin film, which every July, the Bluff Creek Project and other Bigfoot researchers camp out there at Louse Camp, which is the camp where, you know, the early guys, John Green, Renee DeHinden, Peter Byrne, Tom Slick, all those guys, Bob Titmus would camp out there and do expeditions, and Patterson and Gillen camped out there too. And so, you know, finally getting to visit the film site after all these years was really important to me because it gave me kind of a perspective on the film that I hadn't had before. The area's changed, but the Bluff Creek Project has done a masterful job through the years figuring out exactly, yes, this is the exact film site. Believe it or not, there are some old trees that are still there that you can see in the original film and match them up perfectly and stuff. So, here we're seeing some giant salamander graphics. Yeah, I love salamanders. They're fascinating. They're amphibians, of course.
Yeah.
They can breathe through their skin cutaneously, so they can stay underwater, and they don't really have big teeth. Their teeth are pretty tiny, but they have this huge gaping mouth and suction force. So what they do is they lay in wait, and when fish and crustaceans things go by, they just suck them into their mouth. And it's pretty cool. Hopefully someday we'll get a chance to go back there and continue searching, because I think, who knows, you know, this is a habitat that would be conducive to those animals, and there have been accounts through the years, and it's something a little bit different to go search for other than the standard cryptids. I
had my own hellbender story. I used to do a lot of trout fishing, fly fishing up here in Pennsylvania when I was younger. And I was nymph fishing up at what is a creek called Yellow Breeches. It's just north of here. And it's kind of a quasi limestone, freestone creek. But I hooked into one of those hellbenders, and I mean it was about 1.5 feet long. It was big. Yeah. So they're big boys, and they look really weird, right? Because they have this kind of wrinkly. They're flat and wrinkly, and so they're kind of creepy, weird. Oh yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah. I didn't know what the hell I saw there, you know, but yeah, that's what it was. Guy told me it was a hellbender. Yeah, you guys got them up in the Northeast and parts of the Middle America. Sadly, like many species, they are becoming endangered, and primarily because amphibians are the most vulnerable when it comes to pollution and absolutely climatic changes and things like that. So, but it's cool that you got to see one of those, because they're really hard to find these days. Yeah, they are. So I guess we can start with the first question. This is from James West. What can Ken tell us about the winged humanoids in Kansas? And I think he means Kansas City, because there have been a lot of sightings up there in northern Missouri. Yeah, good question to start. First, I want to start out this session with a disclaimer, which is, basically these are just my views and opinions, and quite honestly, everything that we do in this field is speculation. So I'm not coming on here as the definitive expert in anything. I do consider myself very well researched. I've been obsessed with cryptozoology my whole life, and I do it for a living. This is all I do all day is cryptozoological research, and I do a lot of field work. So, and I speak with most of the other researchers out there that have a level head and really put a lot of work and thought into this stuff. So these are just my opinions, but flying humanoids, of course. I did write a book in 2013, Encounters with Flying Humanoids, Mothman, Man-Birds, Gargoyles, and Other Winged Beasts. Unfortunately, it's out of print. I think there is an ebook on Amazon, but it's out of print, so it's kind of hard to find these days. I might re-release that at some point. It focuses on Mothman, but of course, flying humanoid phenomenon is a global phenomenon. There are reports, accounts, as you know, all over. And,
North America, of course, we have the highest concentration between the traditional Mothman, the Chicago Mothman, the Kansas City Mothman, and a lot of sightings in the American Southwest, places from Texas to California. But worldwide, there are these accounts of these anomalous winged humanoid creatures. Now, one interesting aspect is that they seem to vary in their physical appearance from place to place. I mean, you have somewhat of a consistent model in certain locations, like in Point Pleasant and, perhaps to some degree in Chicago and Kansas City. But there are many different types of these flying humanoids. They don't really fit within the paradigm of traditional cryptozoology, because the notion of a half man, half bird, or a winged humanoid it just doesn't make any sense from a zoological perspective. But I have personally interviewed dozens and dozens of people that swear they've encountered these things, and they've been life-changing and pretty traumatic experiences for these folks. So the Kansas City, really the only case that I've been involved in up there, and this was maybe predated the Kansas City, a lot of the Kansas City sightings, involved a family that contacted me years ago and claimed that they had all seen at various points over a few years in their neighborhood this weird giant winged creature. And what they described was not as humanoid as more of like a pterodactyl type of thing. Mm-hmm. But they did, at times, they would describe it as having human-like movements or features, arms in addition to wings and stuff. And it was a very religious family, so they really viewed it as some kind of like demonic thing that was kind of stalking their family or whatever. And it was in a particular neighborhood, which I believe is called Swopes Park. I might be saying that wrong. It's in eastern Kansas. It's near the zoo. And so I interviewed several people in the family and some family friends that had all encountered this thing at different times, and they were very convincing. And then shortly thereafter that, maybe a couple years after that, I began to hear about sightings of winged creatures in Kansas City. And, I haven't personally interviewed any eyewitnesses. I know that there is a Facebook page dedicated to that particular phenomenon. I have corresponded with the lady that runs that and who's done a lot of research, and she evidently has interviewed lots of people in that area. So the things worth pointing out are that these winged humanoid flaps seem to be concentrated in certain areas for whatever reason. They seem to come in spurts. So you'll have like periods of high activity where a lot of these things are being seen, and then maybe gaps when they're not being seen so much. Mm-hmm. There seem to be, Lon, and you can certainly weigh on this with your experience in the Chicago cases, there seem to be a lot of sort of supernatural or spectral qualities to these sightings. The creature's appearance changes somewhat, it vanishes. The glowing red eyes, which is always kind of a strong component of paranormal activity or encounters, the sulfuric smells and bad smells, hazy, misty, weird atmospheric things going on. So I don't have more to offer on that one, Lon. What do you think about the Kansas City cases?
Well, I know Margie Kay has been looking at a lot of these. I think she wrote a book about it recently, but yeah. Mm-hmm. I think she got more into the demon aspect or supernatural aspect to them, as opposed to being, something that's flesh and blood. I think, just like with Chicago, and I will say you're one of the few people that I shared all this stuff with as we were going through these sightings early on, and it was. I think what's going on in Kansas City is somewhat similar to what's going on up in the Chicago area. It may very well be the same type of being. There are some different aspects to it, and it seems more supernatural up there. I mean, in Kansas City as opposed to Chicago. So but no, I really haven't looked into much of it. I have had people tell me about these sightings, but I haven't really gone deep into it.
Gotcha. Well, I would say, one thing that I've researched and write about in my book is a lot of the mythologies around the world. And I think that's an interesting element we can bring to any of these modern cases. Is if you go back, in history and in antiquity, I mean, the ancient, the Babylonians and the Sumerians and some of those ancient cultures had winged humanoid deities like the Apkallu and Pazuzu, and all over the world you have different versions of winged humanoids and different legends. The Alkanost and the Grakaribin, and a lot of these winged humanoid creatures were taken to be, and this, people always think about this when they think about the Mothman. They're considered to be warnings or harbingers of some bad thing that's going to happen, whether it's a disaster, a famine, pestilence. So that has been a recurring theme, and you can find that in different cultures around the world, which is kind of intriguing when you think about these are disparate cultures that didn't have any contact, but they have these similar legends of these Mothman type beings. So I don't know. I don't know what they are. I think, we've had these flesh and blood versus paranormal discussions. I'm of the view that perhaps something metaphysical could take on a physical presence, which is not exactly flesh and blood in terms of evolution, but it's there, for whatever reason, it has a physical presence in our reality at that moment. So
I think you would agree that people looking into cryptids, as we do, have to keep an open mind about what the reality of these things, more so now than ever before.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the bottom line, is none of us know. It's all speculation. Try to stay objective is what I tell people. Don't fall in love with one, just like you said, Lon. Don't fall in love with one theory. It's a demon, period. It's the jinn. You don't know. I mean, it's it's something not of it didn't evolve on our planet, but it's here with us, and it shares our reality from time to time, and it scares the beep out of people. I was hoping you'd have a beep there, and I could.
We all know what you're talking about.
It terrifies people. It changes their lives. They're traumatized. They get physically ill. They have weird psychosis and things over the course of their life. So I don't think I would want to encounter one of these things.
Well, that kind of leads into this next question by Nancy Malcolm. What is the one cryptid you would be most afraid to meet?
Ooh, that's actually a pretty good question. Well, I don't know. I guess this would depend on whether we're opening the question to like all of the proposed cryptids, because there's some that are probably not as viable as other things, and then there's kind of the rock star cryptids. Well, I guess the flying humanoids, based on what we just said, would be pretty terrifying, or something like the Dogman, which is described as being like this hyper aggressive and terrifying, and it's almost like these beings feed off of people's fears. I mean, they chase them, they stalk them, they claw at their cars. I interviewed as part of one of the MonsterQuest episodes I was on. If folks remember this one, I went to Mexico, and they had these Mothman sightings down near Monterrey at that time. And I interviewed this police officer named Leonardo Samaniego, who encountered this flying witch with giant black eyes back in January of 2004, and it dove onto his police car at night and was clawing at him, and he passed out. And he was on it made big news. He was on like local TV show news broadcasts and in the newspapers. And I interviewed him a few years after that. And I mean, this is a pretty tough guy. He works in one of the toughest neighborhoods of southern Monterrey called Guadalupe, which is, he's a cop there. And I mean, he was just like sobbing and, talking.
I remember seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, it was very emotional, and this guy was really scared. And so so I would not want to encounter the Witch of Monterey. That would be, I think, a pretty terrifying one. I'll put that on the list.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that whole thing. I mean, I still have people ask me about the flying witches. And I said, well, you need to talk to Ken Gerhard, because he did that segment. And I knew he was, you had been a part of that. So,
well, let's just for fun, let me just throw in it. Can I have a couple of bonus cryptids? Because
sure.
How about the Beast of Gévaudan? I mean, that thing killed like 100 people, and it
absolutely
basically biting their heads off and disemboweling them, and
any of those canids, I don't want to touch.
It was like had this powerful bone crushing ability. If people know the Beast of Gévaudan from southern France, 1760s. So that would be a scary one. I don't think I'd want to encounter that. So yeah, so there we go. You got one kind of like weird paranormal winged creature, and then you have one that's more of like a traditional giant prehistoric bloodthirsty beast kind of thing. And then let's do one in the water. How about Megalodon? Otodus
Yeah, me
Megalodon.
neither.
I'm not a huge
I don't like
proponent
sharks.
that they do survive, but I mean, if you're talking about a giant carnivorous shark that's like 40 feet long that eats whales, and its teeth are like that big, I mean, I wouldn't want to run it. You know, I wouldn't want to be in the ocean. And you know, what was that movie recently? Jason Statham or whatever? No,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah. Well, you know, that kind of segues into this next question, because there are people who believe these megalodons still are around.
Yeah.
Is there one, this is from Marla Snyder, is there one animal that's been declared extinct that you feel may still be alive?
Yeah, that is a good question.
And the first one I think of is the thylacine.
Yeah, that was just that. You got Lon, we're on the same wavelength. I had to think about that because we were coming from that scary place. But yeah, let's go back to traditional cryptozoology. Thylacinus lusocephalus, the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, Tasmanian wolf. They're still there. I mean, they were only officially declared extinct in 1982.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have to, the laws or the rules, you have to wait 50 years after the last known specimen. And so like in the 1930s, you know, one named Benjamin died at the Hobart Zoo in Tasmania. And then 50 years later, there were still, of course, people claiming they seen them, but you know, there hadn't been enough definitive evidence. So they declared, but yeah, I think that definitely there could be some of these thylacines out there in Tasmania, pretty rugged country. They're predators. They're going to be very stealthy and elusive and good at hiding and camouflaging. And there probably aren't many of them, sadly, but I think they're definitely still out there.
Yeah, I think their habitat is more in Australia as opposed to being in Tasmania too. I mean, what do you think?
Well, that's true. There have been a lot of sightings in southeastern Australia, New South Wales. And the interesting story behind that is, if people didn't know this, is that when the thylacines were sadly being hunted to extinction, there was a bounty put on them for some stupid belief that they were killing livestock, which they weren't really. I mean, they could, but they weren't, you know, they weren't the culprits. But anyways, and people were pretty poor at this time, so they were making a lot of money for every thylacine they killed. Well, there was a woman, and I can't remember her name, but she was basically a conservationist who saw this happening, and she apparently trapped several thylacines before they went extinct in Tasmania, where they were abundant, because the last Australian thylacine went extinct like 3,000 years ago, as far as we know. And she took them to Australia, supposedly, and let them loose.
Oh.
And so that is why there's now a belief that if there's a thylacine population in Australia, it's because this woman that was trying to protect them took them out of Tasmania and released them. So I think that's a pretty cool theory if you think about it.
Yeah, that's the first I heard that story.
Yeah, so hidden gem there. So yeah, they're Tasmania or Southern Australia. I have had, it's not a secret, I've announced this before. COVID put a crimp in this plan, but I had been invited to join a thylacine expedition in Tasmania. And it's, as far as I know, it's still kind of on the back burner because Australia's been pretty locked down, understandably, since this pandemic started. But if I could get over there, that would probably be my ultimate dream right now, Lon, is to do some thylacine research. Find one of those things.
I got another one here from Scarborough Sasquatch Station. Are gargoyles considered good or evil entities?
Wow,
that's a matter of opinion.
This is almost like a George Nuri question, because one time, here's a little behind the scenes. I know we're getting off track, but on Coast to Coast, it's always an honor to go on that show. They have you submit a list of questions that you'd like them to ask you, if it'll help you sell your book or talk about things you're interested in. But George kind of goes off script sometimes and just kind of, you know, freelances. And one time he asked me, when I was doing a Mothman Flying Humanoids interview, he asked me, Ken, why are gargoyles so scary? And I was like, I had no answer. I was kind of like shocked because it's not a bad question, but it's just like, why are they scary? I don't know. They are. Okay. So I'm sorry, I digress. Let's get back to what we were talking about. Gargoyles. You know, gargoyles are viewed as, and you find this dichotomy in a lot of different legendary creatures, is that they have this dichotomy. They have they are a protector on one hand, but they can also be, kind of a scary, avenging bad thing, that you don't want to encounter. And they have those dual personalities. And I think you have that probably in a lot of the gargoyles. I mean, I can't pronounce the French word, but gargoyle comes from a French word meaning well, or reservoir, because and the whole legend has to do with these creatures that were protecting the water and the water sources and things. So that's why you see a lot of gargoyles that are fountains with like water shooting out of their mouths and stuff in Europe. But yeah, they are good because they are at times can be protectives and sentinels, but at other times maybe there can be bad ones and they're aggressive and scary and dangerous. So I don't know if that adequately answered the question, but.
Well, he has another question. It's about a werewolf, or see a person. Have you ever seen a person who was suspected of being a werewolf, and what type of features distinguish it from a dogman?
Okay. Well, I don't know anyone that's seen a traditional werewolf in that sense. Obviously, I've interviewed dogman witnesses, as you have. So this is interesting because a lot of the dogman researchers and investigators don't like the werewolf being brought into it, because they know that's something else. Because a werewolf, first of all, a werewolf is obviously a shapeshifter, right? The traditional European legends from 15th and 16th century France and Germany, it was a person who had basically entered into a pact with the devil and obtained this ability either by putting on a magical ointment, an incantation, an animal fur over the body, and they would literally transform into this. And, ultimately there was a price to pay because they had made this deal with the devil. So it was going to be a bad, bad trip south when they were finished with all that. But a traditional European werewolf is a shapeshifter, but it's not bipedal. Virtually all werewolf legends talk about basically huge wolves on 4 legs, not 2, but they do have some different characteristics. They're often said to have human eyes. So their eyes are not canid or dog-like. They have human eyes in a wolf's body, and they frequently do not have a tail. They have the whole body of the wolf except for the tail. And they don't really go up on 2 legs. And they're essentially like giant killer wolves, but they have a level of intelligence and cunning of a human, almost like a serial killer. So it's not just like a wolf, which would be scary enough, but it's like this wolf that's kind of planning, how to get you, or, how to eradicate a person at a time, or whatever the werewolf is going to do. So that doesn't really match any of the modern dogman accounts we get from North America. I know from speaking with Linda Godfrey and other researchers that dogman does go down on all 4s occasionally. I mean, that was something I hadn't heard that as much, but apparently that has been reported. So yeah, dogman is more like a bipedal anthropomorphic, half human, half dog, similar to the Mothman and the flying humanoids, in that there seems to be kind of a weird metaphysical aspect, and they chase and terrify, and they're hyper aggressive. But the traditional European werewolf, was always thought of as more of a kind of associated with witchcraft and the devil. And it's kind of like a curse type thing that, I don't know if they're connected. I mean, to me, the names are similar enough. And that's what I always bring up. I mean, werewolf basically means dogman, but it's just half German. So what do you think about that, Lon? I think they're different, but the same. I mean, who knows?
The whole werewolf, upright canine, dogman lore really started to hit the United States, it hit America when a lot of the Pennsylvania Dutch, or the German farmers came over here.
That's true.
And started settling in Pennsylvania and Maryland. And they were calling those things, they had all kinds of names for them. But anyway, they were reporting these canids, cryptids, and I think that's where a lot of this started from. Now, I'm not saying that these are all legends and these are maybe thought forms or something. I don't know what they are. But, we do get a lot of reports. And here in Pennsylvania, we get a lot of reports. We're working on some new reports right now up in Cambria County, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania has definitely been a hot spot, I think,
Yeah.
up there with Ohio, Kentucky, and, maybe Michigan, Wisconsin. I mean, it seems like those 5 states, you guys all have these, high
We've had some
again,
strange sightings. Yeah.
similar again to the flying humanoids, right? You get these
absolutely
these pockets or whatever. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we got them here. I mean, I had my encounter in '88, and we've also had these winged humanoid sightings in this area several times. I mean, myself and Timothy Renner, he's talked about it, and we've had, this York and Adams County area has been known for having a lot of weird things. But we've had these winged humanoids as well as a few Dogman and upright canine sightings. So, yeah, these are hot spots. There's no doubt about it. Nancy Malcolm asked, what is the difference between ETs and cryptids?
Well, obviously extraterrestrial means, not of the land, not of this land. That's would be the Latin translation. And that by that meaning our planet Earth. So an extraterrestrial would theoretically be a life form that is not evolved or developed on this planet. And a cryptid, the traditional description of cryptid, and the one that I mostly adhere to, is the one that, it stems from cryptozoology, which is based on the concept of undiscovered animal species. And, even if those animal species often display sort of fabulous characteristics and have legends behind them, things like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, mystery cats, and things like that, lake monsters. But, I think obviously the field has evolved not because of a conscious effort by the investigators that are true to that, original format of zoological mystery, but mainly because you had other investigators like John Keel and, at Ivan Sanderson, who was one of the founders of cryptozoology, towards the end of his career, when he started the Society for the Investigation of the Unexplained in New Jersey, and he got really into like UFOs and other phenomenon. And so, and then you had a guy named Ted Holliday in the 60s, who was a Loch Ness investigator who went from flesh and blood Nessie to paranormal, the dragon, and I can't remember the name of his book, The Goblin Universe. So there was kind of like an evolution with cryptozoology starting in the late 60s, early 70s, where some researchers began to look at this stuff more spiritually as opposed to just straight zoology. And then I think, I don't know if he's going to like me calling him out on this, but Lauren Coleman and Jerome Clark, when they wrote Creatures of the Outer Edge in the 70s, they were writing about Bigfoot and lake monsters and Big Bird, but they were taking more of that kind of like Fortean look at it. Like, are these just animals, or is it something more like beyond our realm of comprehension? So the field has just kind of evolved over the decades, and particularly when social media got big in recent years, and the general public had more influence in terms of, definitions of what a cryptid should be. And, so now, of course, a lot of people think a cryptid also refers to the Slender Man or the Wendigo, or, some of these things that were not really considered cryptids back in the day. But I don't know. I guess if we were going to try to please as many people as we can, Lon, we could say, okay, so a cryptid means like a creature of the earth, even if it's a really far out creature, but we think it's been here on Earth for a long time. But an extraterrestrial is going to be something that we really feel, okay, this is definitely not from our planet. So it came down in a craft, it's collecting specimens. I mean, this is all speculation. There's like, what would an extraterrestrial do on our planet? But then you have that blurry line of like interdimensional and portals, maybe it's not from space. It's an ultraterrestrial. It's from another reality or dimension.
That's a term I use more and more now, ultraterrestrial, because it seems like there's more phenomena now that can fit in that category as opposed to just saying an extraterrestrial or a cryptid, or maybe there's a connection there.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe if John Keel had it right, then he thought that this phenomenon was all the same thing. That these ultra-terrestrial beings were basically, he called it the global trickster. That
Yep.
it was a shape-shifting phenomenon. So it
Mm-hmm.
took different forms. It was a Dogman, then it became a Mothman or a Bigfoot, and we could only speculate why it was doing this. But so something from another dimension could pose as something that's coming from outer space, as opposed to through a portal. Maybe I'm getting into some pretty wild speculation now, but you know what I'm saying, Lon. I mean,
It's not any different what I'm
they're
talking about half
coming
the
from
time.
somewhere else. It's all about our perception. How do we interpret
Absolutely.
it? What is this phenomenon? Where's it coming from? Some people claim they've been abducted by aliens. Some people, they claim they've been abducted by Bigfoots. Is it the same type of abduction? It's just the person who's being abducted is visualizing it or perceiving it in a different way.
Absolutely. There's something that came up here. AB put it up there about when you were in Alaska and you talked about the little people up there. And I always thought that was fascinating. Tell us a bit about that again, will you?
Yeah. So, as you investigate Bigfoot all over North America, particularly I've noticed if you're speaking to Native American people, you'll hear a lot of stories. I mean, they'll often, acknowledge, yes, there is something like Bigfoot in our culture, a big, hairy, wild man or whatever. But they always, I've encountered Native American people from Alaska to the Dakotas to Central America, different cultures that have all told me about little people legends. And not the traditional, we're not talking about necessarily a straight traditional European fairy gnome, type of leprechaun type of thing, because they often describe these little people as being covered in hair and having almost more like a Bigfoot type of quality, even though they're very small and short, powerfully built, about 3.5 feet tall, usually reddish colored hair. That's interesting. The long claws, long teeth, very aggressive towards humans, very powerful and very greatly feared. So they almost sounds like a kind of a mini dwarf Sasquatch, almost similar to the so-called orang pendek or short man of Sumatra, or the Ibu Gogo of Flores, or some of these other, sort of little hairy men stories from around the world. Now there is a slightly metaphysical or woo aspect to the little people legends, because even though they're often described as hairy little savage like men, they also have some magical abilities. According to many natives, they can alter time, they can step, they live in caves, they abduct people, but they can alter time or they can vanish. So they're actually very frightening to people. The Native Americans seem to be more terrified of little people than hairy men, Sasquatch type things. I wrote a chapter in my Bigfoot book where I focused on the little, I call them Littlefoot. I don't think I invented that name. I definitely came up with it before the movie, but I think there were other people that may have called it. So it looks like a Bigfoot, but it's little. It's a Littlefoot. Some of those accounts may refer to juvenile Sasquatches. We know Bigfoot is not born 7 feet tall and 800 pounds, but still, the beliefs, these native beliefs, usually refer to, tribes or, family units of these little people creatures. So some of the names in Alaska, they had many different names. They're called Anukans, Urchin Rock, Jinxiak, Inkshiak. In the Dakotas, they are the Narumbi, the Awakuli, the Hechesitehi. In Minnesota, the Memagweshi. You got the Albert Witch, the Pukwudgies. Central America, they're the Duende. In Mexico, the Duende. So yeah, El Kakui. So they're just like little goblin type things. I don't know. Again, it's one of those things that kind of straddles that borderline between, is there a zoological aspect to this? Because there were little hairy man-like creatures running all over Africa and Asia for millions of years. Could they still be around, or are these more in line with some of this other kind of far out, what we were just talking about, something from another dimension or whatever? But they certainly, the traditions go back a very long time in a lot of different American cultures.
Well, the Albatwitch is what we have here, and it's not. It's in along the Susquehanna River over in Lancaster County around.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's Columbia, Pennsylvania, and yeah, they have. In fact, they have a festival there every year.
Yeah.
And that legend has been going on for a long time. But some of the accounts, I had an account come to me. Now this was further south across the river into York County. In Red Line, but of a small little Bigfoot that this woman had seen running across the field and stuff. So people see them. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I do have a footprint that I cast in Belize when I was doing a Duende investigation in 2004, 2006. And it was in a pretty remote area at a place called Pervasian Creek. We were searching in the Maya Mountains where a lot of these duendes were said to live. And I found one humanoid. Well, I found like 2 or 3, but they basically very human-like prints, but small. But you could see that it was not a shoe or a boot or a moccasin. It was someone walking around barefoot. Now, first of all, this is a very unpopulated area. So there really aren't, there are traditional Maya people from that region, but they don't live in these particular areas, and they certainly don't walk around barefoot because you have a lot of fertile ants, snakes, and scorpions and tarantulas and things, spiky things on the ground, thorny things. But this one footprint in particular had a pointy heel. It was a human-like track. It was about 6 inches long with a pointy heel. And what was cool about that was that was one of the stories that I'd heard about the duende. Is that they have, they're these little goblin-like creatures that live in the Maya Mountains, and they leave footprints with a pointy heel. Now, similarly, it's also said that their feet are on backwards, which is a recurring trope or theme that you find in different, from the Yeti to, the Duende to other mystery human-like creatures. In some legends, they're said to have their feet on backwards, which I don't know exactly what that means, but it's just kind of one of those things that comes up. So, another interesting thing about the duende is that he only has 4 fingers. And so if you show him 5 fingers, it pisses him off. And then he'll, basically that's like, you don't want to do that to a duende or any of these little people, is show them how many fingers you have. Because they're very jealous about fingers, apparently. So
interesting.
Digits. Wow. They have digit envy.
I got an interesting question here from Anne Celine. If someone said you could choose one cryptid and I can take you to it, you can observe it and learn all there is to know about it, which would you choose?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know that's a real tough one.
That's a good question. Well, hi, Lady Anne. I appreciate the question. She's a good friend of mine, by the way. But that's a great question. Let's see. You know what? People have often asked me, like, what's my favorite cryptid, which is always hard for me to answer because I love them all so much. But I'll say a traditional Native American Thunderbird. If someone could take me to the top of a peak, and in my mind, I've got kind of this Indiana Jones scenario where I've got this Native American guy that knows, he's a brave warrior that knows where the nest is, and we climb up to the top of this peak and we look across and we see this magnificent bird with a 20-foot wingspan, majestically guarding the nest, and huge raptor-like beak. That would be pretty cool. I would want to observe one of those in the wild. And I mean, really any of them, but that's I guess I'll choose that one because I've always been fascinated with the Thunderbird accounts. I've interviewed so many eyewitnesses. I've never seen one, but so many people that I've talked to that have sworn they've seen him, and it just must be breathtaking, awe-inspiring to see one of these things.
The winged beings are really fascinating. Yeah, I'm like you. I mean, the whole facets of it. Pterodons, Thunderbirds, humanoids. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so many different types. The manta things that you've documented. And I mean, I've had some really, I don't know. I had a lady about a year ago that claimed that she saw a winged black panther. So that was almost like a combination of 2 cryptids. We know the Black Panther cryptids are pretty, but she said, no, this was definitely a Black Panther, but it had wings too. So you get those kind of like oddball kind of accounts that are pretty.
Yeah, we get them once in a while. We do. Yeah, Nancy Malcolm asked, what is the newest and or oldest cryptid being reported now?
Oh, are we talking about oldest in terms of like the legend and the mythology?
Yeah, I guess we could.
Well, using
And that goes back a long way.
Using the broad term cryptid, we already talked about, the ancient Assyrians and probably the Apkallu, probably the ancient Sumerians and Apkallu.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's like 3,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
With Bigfoot, we often talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a Babylonian story. So that would probably be a couple thousand years ago. So we do have kind of Bigfoot type creatures. If you want to include Endiku, which is the hairy man-like creature in the Epic of Gilgamesh, that would be 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. Oh no, I got one. What about the archetype of the giant water serpent? I mean, you can go back.
Absolutely.
It's in the Bible with Leviathan. It's in Scandinavian Viking mythology. It's going to bug me. I'll have to think about this. But they're like dragons. They're water dragons, but they're always like serpentine and just massive. And you find those traditions, those legends that go back hundreds and thousands of years in several cultures too. So we have different, interesting. We have like the three major archetypes are the winged, creatures from the air, the aquatic creatures from the water, and then the terrestrial creatures are often like a bestial version of us, like a primitive hair-covered giant man, as opposed to, so those seem to be pretty prevalent archetypes around the world that go back a long ways in legends and mythology.
So how about the newest?
The newest
cryptid.
He showed me a picture of like a weird, I guess that was that Endiku? Okay.
I think that was Endiku.
Okay, so I was like, what is this like bearded guy with a donkey?
Yeah, I think that's who that is.
And he put it up right as you said, what is the newest? And I thought, oh, is that like the newest is like the name of the weird cryptid or something. Okay. Sorry, it's been a long day.
Oh, I get it.
The newest cryptid is obviously Dogman, because I think, as you said earlier, I mean, we didn't really, until like the 80s and 90s, when Linda Godfrey started documenting the Beast of Bay Road. And then it was even after that we started hearing about, oh no, the Michigan Dogman's been around forever. Well, no one had ever really heard of the Michigan Dogman until Beast of Bray Road. And so I think that's a pretty new cryptid on the scene. And, I don't know, I don't really put a lot of stock in these cryptid creepy pasta things like Slender Man and.
Well, I just wrote a book about that, so I don't
know.
Black-eyed
kids, is that a cryptid? I mean, they're new.
It's hard to describe them as cryptids. I mean, I look at this. I call them the meme humanoids, or the pale crawlers, or whatever you want to call them. I don't really look at them as cryptids, though. We really don't know what they are, but. We don't even know if they're just somebody's imagination or something that's being thought formed, or a tulpa, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. And, you can't have any, I mean, I often express that I am that traditional old school Bernard Hubelman's, Roy Mackle cryptozoologist. But I can't control, and no one can control, what cultures want to, and society wants to view as a cryptid, or what different people want to. There's no hard, fast rules. It's not like traditional science where, you have to, so people can call whatever they want a cryptid. I'm not going to stop them from doing that. I just always want to point out that there's two ways to look at any mysterious creature. One is that, is there any way that it could have conceivably evolved on our planet? Does it fit into the scheme, into the paradigm of the fossil record and all the species that we've known about? Does it make biological and zoological sense? Bigfoot does. Thunderbirds do. Mystery cats do. Loch Ness Monster does. So there's a lot of cryptids that do, that you could say this could be a prehistoric survival or something that we just overlooked.
Right.
But other cryptids like Mothman, Dogman, Goatman, mermaids, black-eyed kids, they don't fit into the scheme of zoology. So yes, they're fascinating. I love talking about them. They're mysterious. They're scary. They're weird. There's legends that back them up and eyewitnesses that have seen them. So people can call those cryptids. I don't necessarily always do that. Sometimes on a show like this, I'll be a little bit more open to my interpretation because this is fun, and we're having like good conversation here about what people think. So
here's an interesting question, but from Summer Nights. Dogman eats roadkill, so does that make it a normal animal?
It's a good question. I like the critical thinking there is good. Okay, so it has a biological need to consume energy, which all animals do. All animals on the planet, whether you're talking about a coral or a bat or a whale or whatever, there's two things that cause an organism to be classified as an animal. One is that it's modal, which means that it can be spontaneously move around, even if it's not a lot of movement, but at some point it's going to move freely to wherever it wants to be. And two, that it's heterotrophic, meaning that it consumes other animals or their waste products or plants or for energy. So yes, so Dogman has been seen eating roadkill. Probably one of the most famous Beast of Bray Road sightings by a woman named Laura Andreezy that saw this thing feasting on roadkill. So that certainly is intriguing, and I guess you could score that one in the box of people that want to say, okay, no, Dogman is a flesh and blood animal. It's something unknown. You could check that box.
Well, I will say this.
But those accounts aren't real common. I'll just add that. Go ahead.
Most of the sightings of Bigfoot that we have here, now I'm talking about in this area, are seen on the road collecting roadkill. Up around Micho State Forest in Pennsylvania, just west of Gettysburg.
Gotcha.
I get a lot of reports of people who have seen Bigfoot collecting dead deer and stuff that have been hit. And we've also had cryptid canids seen feasting on roadkill along the side of the road during the day as well. So, I mean.
All right. Well, that's that's fascinating. I appreciate, I always like to hear about those kind of different regional patterns and things, because that's real important as an investigator. But this is a kind of a cool segue along to say, well, there are the people that talk about, could some of the Dogman sightings actually be misrepresentations of Bigfoots or Sasquatches that are seen, and what are the variables here? Okay. People, the main one is that people, when they see them, they freak out and their emotion goes to 100 because you're not expecting to see something that shouldn't exist or that doesn't exist. And it just literally throws you into a state of, so it's really going to affect how you remember and respond and perceive. Usually these sightings are at night and they're often very quick. Someone's in a car and it's just like a few seconds or a brief glance. So if Bigfoots and Sasquatches eat a lot of roadkill, and we only have like a handful of Dogman accounts of them eating roadkill, then we could, speculate that maybe those Dogman accounts are just, people may, oh no, it had a dog-like head. Well, maybe, the lighting or shadows or, it's just the way they interpreted it. It was dog-like, but it was, hairy and man-like too, which kind of fits in the Bigfoot Sasquatch category.
Well, that's something that we have looked into here as best as possible. Is when we talk to witnesses, are they confusing them with a Bigfoot?
It could happen. We don't know. I mean, I'm not completely trying to debunk the
I understand what you're saying,
but some of them could be Bigfoots, and people just especially if they're not really. It's just we're all different, right, Lon? Everyone has different biases and influences, and some people will look at, it's like when they do those ink blot tests at this, it's like, some people see a balloon and some people see an elephant and some people see whatever. So
everybody has a different perspective on anything. If I haven't learned one thing, that's one thing I have learned all these years. Everybody looks at something differently. Absolutely.
And I love that because to me, that makes life much more interesting. I'm glad that we don't all agree on everything.
Right. Scarborough Sasquatch Station asked, duendes, are they always seen with those large hats?
No, yeah, not always, but that is a common trope. The duende who we were talking about a moment ago is that they have these big sombreros. Sometimes they carry little machetes. Sometimes he's got a long beard. The technical full name is Tata Duende, which means grandfather, little grandfather, or maybe another word on lean. But they look like little bearded men. And there's probably, just like you were talking about earlier about how a lot of the werewolf legends migrated over to your region from, the Dutch settlers and other European settlers. Well, Belize has a mixture of the ancient old Maya culture, but there was also a lot of European influence that came over from both England and Spain. So some of those European fairy gnome legends may have migrated over. And of course, duende is also in Spain. If you go to Spain, you'll hear about duendes, and in the Philippines, which is on the other side of the world, but there's a strong Spanish cultural influence in the Philippines because of the colonization there. So you hear about duendes in the Philippines as well. But no, they don't always wear the hats, but that has been reported.
Interesting. James West asked, and he's asked me this, and I haven't given him a great answer. Have you ever heard of ways to keep Dogman away from your property?
Well, let me think about this for a minute, because I've spoken to, I don't know. First of all, how do we test that? How do we test this? If it's an experiment, how do we know it's keeping them away from your property?
Right.
I don't hear about a lot of cases of like habituation, like with Bigfoot, where people claim that dogmans are coming onto their property all the time. I did investigate a case in Vidor, Texas, years ago, where there was a young couple that claimed that there was a dogman type creature. They called it a werewolf, but this was back in the 70s. Basically, was coming on their property, banging on, ripping the screens on their windows, banging on the walls, and it killed a bunch of their dogs. And how they dealt with it ultimately was they went outside with a shotgun and shot it with a shotgun. And but they did move out of there pretty quickly, from what I remember after that. But that would be one way. That's how I would deal with it. I've got a 12 gauge sitting over here against the wall, and that's how I guess that sounds. Maybe I sound a little psychotic saying that, but I am Texan, so I'd say, if there's a dogman comes on my property, I'm going to get the 12 gauge out, and I think that'll deter it from ever coming back, or maybe not. But you could also have a can of bear spray if you didn't want to be lethal with it.
That would probably be the best bet out of all.
Shoot it with some bear spray, and if it'll stop a 1,000-pound grizzly, it would probably stop an 800-pound dogman, I would guess.
You would hope, yeah. Also, Scarborough asked, Ken, have you been or experienced any infrasound? And was it low level or high level? Now, I know you've been around a lot of zoo animals, a lot of big cats. Have you ever experienced any of that?
I don't think I've ever encountered any, infrasound from any animals I can think of. I work at the San Antonio Zoo as a volunteer educator, and I spend a lot of time at the elephant exhibit. We've got 2 awesome Asian elephants there, and sometimes I can almost sense like they're making these low rumbly sounds, that they're kind of like under their breath, but it's kind of hard to tell. But it's never really affected me. Like I never felt like, right. It's just like, wow, that is a really low frequency. It's almost like I'm feeling it more than I'm hearing it. And I think I've also gotten that from the giraffe at the zoo on occasion, but nothing that's ever really affected me in that way. Now I will say that we did an episode of Missing in Alaska on the HARP facility up in Alaska, which is like this. I don't want to get into a whole explanation, but it was like a thing that they were using really ultrasound, not infrasound, which is low frequencies. Ultrasound are frequencies above our range of hearing. Oh, sorry, I kind of knocked my light there. I got too excited. And I have to be honest here. The producers were kind of messing with my head a lot on that episode. So like the first thing that happened was there was this guy named Dr. Nick Begich, who has been investigating and writing about HARP for years. And he did this experiment where he put electricity and sound waves through my body, like by touching my hand, and then I could hear it in my head, even though it wasn't coming through my ears. That really just experiencing that, just threw me completely in this weird state of mind because it was like so different from anything I'd ever experienced before. And he was kind of using that to kind of demonstrate or illustrate how something like HAARP could work, which is the concept is that sound waves can alter your brain waves. So if it's a concentrated energy, whether it's low frequency or high frequency, your brain has like this, just like your heart, it's got this rhythm and this cadence in a particular frequency. And theoretically, you could disrupt that with sound waves. So not the infrasound thing, but we did that. They did that. And then when we ended up going to the HAARP facility, and obviously it was supposed to be shut down. We couldn't get in, but we were flying a drone over a Navy, which was really stupid, so we're doing a lot of things that were already like, and there were all these security, and stories. And so I don't know, I kind of got psyched out, and I felt like it's kind of sick, and like just I had to get out of there and a little panicky. And so that was actually demonstrated in the show. So a little bit of that, I amped it up, but I really did feel that way. I felt like really nauseous. I'm just so, but I don't know if it was something about being at the HAARP facility, if that was still, because supposedly it was shut down and they weren't doing any of these experiments anymore, that even though the ray of transmitters and stuff is still there. So not infrasound exactly. I may have encountered some ultrasound type thing, but it was probably more likely just like a psychological thing where I psyched myself out and thought just being at this place was making me feel weird. Hopefully that's at least that gives you something, even if it's not,
Well, let me ask you this. What are your thoughts on cryptids, Bigfoot, upright canines actually emitting these type of frequencies?
Well, I write about it in my book, The Essential Guide to Bigfoot, that, the allegations of infrasound with Bigfoot have been around for a while now. I don't know if I've heard of any real solid, I don't know any Bigfoot investigators that have put forward a really solid argument that that's what happened to them if they experienced something like that.
Right.
I heard a story, like this is a perfect example. I heard a story when I was up at an Oklahoma Bigfoot event a few weeks ago. There were 3 investigators walking in a line through the woods, where there's all this Bigfoot activity. And the guy in the middle claimed that he had been zapped with infrasound and started like freaking out, and I feel horrible and I got to get out of here. Well, how did this thing was able to laser beam focus infrasound at one guy, but not the other 2 guys? That doesn't make sense, because it's like, if you know anything about sound, it's not like especially like sound waves, sine waves of like low frequencies are not like super high concentrated. They're just like, they would be theoretically be these booming. So I don't know. So, you hear stories like that where people claim they've been quote unquote zapped, but it's all just so highly speculative about whether Bigfoot could really even has this ability just because it's big, and how it would use it. And now the best story I've heard actually relates to the stench over this, the sound. There was a guy at a research location in Louisiana years ago that claimed that the Sasquatch basically was near him and put off this horrible smell, which we've heard about from time to time. And it made him feel so bad and so sick that they had to take him, the other Bigfoot researchers had to rush him to the hospital, to the emergency room, because he was that. So that's interesting, right? That you don't hear a lot of smell attacks as opposed to sound attacks.
Like
a
chemical weapon.
Yeah, so exactly. Very well put. It's a chemical weapon of some kind. So I don't know. This is all fun to talk about, but we just don't know.
Well, as more so with upright canines, when people encounter these things that people here in Pennsylvania, especially people who are armed. I have had hunters walk up on these things, and they tell us that they get this feeling that they've got to back away. I know they're scared anyway. Sure. But they, just drop your weapon or lower it and back away very slowly. It's almost like it's something telling them to do that as opposed to just being scared.
Yeah. People have reported that, and people have reported the mind speak. I'm not an advocate of that, but I just, after that same Oklahoma lecture I just mentioned, I did my very traditional, Aper style Bigfoot presentation that Grover Krantz or John Bindernagel would be proud of. And afterwards, this hunter came up to me, full on camo. You can tell he's an outdoorsman, has the right gear, red oak or whatever, and says, you're wrong. They do mind speak. I encountered a family of Sasquatches in the woods, and I began to hear their voices in my head. And he even had like a word that was like Garaka or something, and I didn't want to be like disrespectful. I said, sir, I'm not going to question your integrity or what you're telling me. You seem very sincere. I can just say that I've not seen enough evidence that this so-called mind speak between Sasquatches and human actually happens. And I've investigated so many cases over the years. It's so rare. And it's kind of the same with the infrasound thing. It's kind of like, does it really happen? Or is it just something that's kind of, adds that kind of extra quality to the mystery that people
I just look at it as another example of perception. I mean, they're perceiving, maybe someone perceive. Yeah.
I mean,
fear can do a lot of things to you.
Your story kind of nailed it. These people, they encounter them and they're, think about this. It's like, you've been wired, your brain's been wired, your reality has been set your whole life. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly something that is not supposed to exist, that is a myth, steps right into your reality. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's got to just shake the core and the foundation of everything. I mean, Lon, we both heard these stories. I know hunters that have encountered these things that basically never went out in the woods again. They sold their guns. I'm done. I'm out.
Absolutely.
It's
I hear it all the time.
Pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah. Android Purity asks, do you believe that ancient European reports of werewolves and dogmen, and I mean, are they the same as the American phenomena, the American reports? Are they the same thing?
It sounds like a question we covered about 30 minutes ago.
So it's similar to that.
Okay, we'll encapsulate it. I don't know. The traditional European werewolves, as we discussed, are shapeshifters. They don't walk on their hind legs. They're always on four legs. They don't have necessarily very human-like qualities. The man part is not very strong, except for their human-like eyes and their cunning human-like mind and abilities. Mm-hmm. They don't seem to match with the Dogman. That said, it seems to be too much of a coincidence that you have at least some similarities in terms of, that combination or that synthesis of a human and a canid or a dog. Now, I always like to talk about psychology and cultural anthropological things, which are probably not going to be very interesting to everyone listening. But, dogs, why do people love Dogman so much? Well, in my opinion, it's because humans love dogs so much. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm a cat lover personally, but I love all animals. I don't judge. But I know how much people that are dog lovers love dogs. I mean, mm-hmm. they're man's best friend for a reason. We've been cohabitating for at least 15 to 30,000 years. So I think one of the reasons that Dogman is such a popular cryptid is that it's a dog man. I know that sounds stupid because it's so simple. Yeah. But I think there's something to that people really are fascinated with the Dogman and werewolves, because we already love and are connected to our dogs. And this is like another, it's a strange creature, but it's got those it's familiar to us. I guess that's mm-hmm. what I'm trying to say. But
absolutely. Here's a great one. Vincent wants to know, have you ever experienced any paranormal activity of any kind yourself?
Yes, I have. The one incident I can definitively say was years ago. I was speaking at a paranormal conference in a place called Jefferson, Texas, which is the most haunted city in Texas. It's also where they have the Bigfoot conference in October, by the way. And it's the Bigfoot capital, Texas. But also there's a lot of haunted bed and breakfasts, very old railroad kind of town. And I was invited to a ghost investigation. I like to tag along and just see what people are doing. It's not necessarily my expertise or anything, but so there were some people in the front of the house, some ghost investigators using one of these Ovilus things, which is a ghost box, where they're doing mm-hmm. AM radio transmission and hearing words and trying to communicate with the spirits. I was in the hallway, and this was actually called the McKay House, which unfortunately tragically burned down a few years ago. But there was this big heavy kitchen door in the middle of the house, real old house, and this big heavy door. And I'm talking to this other paranormal investigator, and suddenly the door just slammed shut. It was wide open, and it just goes bam. And we both just looked at it and we're like, did that just happen? Because, it's not like there's a breeze. People aren't moving in and out of the house. Everything's quiet and still except for this. And we went over there and of course we tried to debunk it. Is the door loose? Is there a breeze? Where's the air vent? And I don't know. So we saw this door slam and really couldn't find any good reason why this door would have just suddenly slammed like that. That was, I don't know. I can't say definitively that's 100% paranormal, but there was no physical reason for this door to slam, and it was in a very haunted bed and breakfast where ghost experience. So I don't know. That was kind of cool. Another time I was investigating a thing called the South Pittsburgh Hospital in Tennessee, which is like this old abandoned hospital that they do these ghost investigations.
Mm-hmm.
And I was with an investigator that was doing like these. He was broadcasting. He brought a sound system, and he was broadcasting hospital sounds, like trying to bring the hospital back to life with like different EKG machines and people coughing. It was pretty cool. And we had one of these ghost box things doing, and we did hear, and it was all kind of subjective, but we thought we heard, some responses to some of the questions and things that were pretty coincidental. And in that same hospital, I felt one night walking down, because we were camping there, I was walking down one of the dark hallways by myself. And I'm not scared. I ain't afraid of no ghosts. You know what I mean? I have my paranormal friends out there always like, like, oh, I was like, well, do the ghosts kill people? Do they have guns and knives? Like, well, no. Why, be afraid? But, they scare you. But anyways, so I was walking down this dark hallway and I suddenly felt this like surge of energy in my body. Like it kind of felt like electricity. I was like tingle, like I was, touching a low voltage. And I don't know, again, I don't know if that was 100% paranormal, but I've heard people talk about that, like feeling this like energy in a haunted, really highly haunted place. So I don't know. Those are the things that I can think of. They're not super dramatic. I didn't see any apparitions or nothing scratched me or a book flying at my head, but a door slamming, a weird electrical sensation, and kind of some weird ghost box voices that almost like made sense. Like, oh, wow, we asked it this and it did say that. So I don't know. There's a lot of subjectivity and I find it fascinating. I think paranormal investigation, like I said, it's not my thing, but the people that do it, I think it's a really interesting, mystery to pursue, obviously. So.
I had another question from Dauzi 9mm. That's an interesting name. Neither flesh and blood or paranormal explanation seems to satisfy all aspects of witness testimony. Could there be a technological aspect involved that we don't fully understand?
Well, that's a great question. And actually, I put a post up on social media a few days ago because I know so many paranormal researchers, and I've kind of put the question out there, like, well, what, in your opinion, what paranormal causes could make people think that they're having experiences like seeing cryptids and creatures like that? And there were some great answers, but some of them are more technical than I would probably be able to express. But the most recurring theme was the fact that EMF, or electromagnetic energies, which we know, can be generated by, we know they can be, generated by like wiring and things like that in old buildings because they get picked up. But also, like in the earth, you have, electromagnetic energy within the geologic structure of the earth and different types of deposits and things. I don't know if that energy is intense enough, and that's what we debated. Like, is that intense enough to affect someone in a way that they would suddenly have an experience because whatever reason it's stimulating the mind or the energy fields or whatever it is. And we also have some electromagnetic energy running through our bodies, a very minute amount. So that was kind of the thing. So maybe that answers the question, that maybe some type of energy, like electromagnetic energy, as far as like how it does it, I mean, these are like concepts, Lon, to me, that are like so far beyond our current ability to understand how our world and universe works around us. We're still always learning, trying to figure out why. But that was kind of an interesting theory, is that human brain perception is somehow altered, or we become more receptive, like big transmitters basically, or conduits, where we can either experience things that we can't normally experience that are happening around us, or we're opening doorways to other fields and levels of energy and reality. I don't know. It's all pretty cosmic stuff, but
I think there's something to that, though. I get people ask me a lot because I'm near Gettysburg and I've had encounters there, and they ask about it, and I say, well, the geological aspects of this area and other areas are high concentrations of quartz, granite.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they do are conducive to electrical fields or magnetic fields that cause some type of distortion that allow you to sense these things or see these things more so than you would at other places. I don't know. That may very well be that. I don't know. But people ask it all the time.
Yeah, that's a great one. And I've got another turn I want to take on this question, which might actually, some people might not like it, but it's just something I think it's worth considering. So there have been recent studies that have found that humans are born and can generate with our minds trace elements of something called DMT, which is the most powerful hallucinogen on the planet. And there are theories that maybe it's locked into our genetic code because our ancient ancestors would eat mushrooms and other psychedelic drugs as they were doing these spiritual ceremonies or religious, awakenings or whatever, vigils. Is it possible that we are able to, basically our minds are able to generate hallucinations that are so vivid that we are completely incapable of distinguishing between reality and this hallucination? Because one of the interesting common tropes or themes with these, supposedly with DMT hallucinations, is that people claim that they have either spiritual or mythological experiences where they're seeing or experiencing things that are perceived to be mythological in nature, such as a winged humanoid from 3,000 years ago. So I don't know. I know this is going to piss people off. I'm not hallucinating. Well, I mean, we have to accept, let's be critical thinkers here. We have to accept the fact that it is at least possible that humans can have hallucinations. And it's not something we have a choice about. It's not like, okay, I'm not going to have a hallucination today. It's just something that happens to our minds to where we are 100% convinced that we just saw this creature that's mythological and we saw it. It was there. And our brain just can't tell the difference. I don't know. It's kind of I know it seems like a bummer because the world seems more interesting if they're coming from other dimensions and stuff, but what if they're mind monsters? I mean, it's not that different from what you were talking about earlier with the thought projections.
Yeah, I mean,
way of
exactly
explaining it.
That's the whole thing about all this that we do. You got to keep an open mind. The conundrum part of all this is always there. The whole thing's an enigma, and we try to figure it out. So we're going to come up with all kinds of explanations and theories.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to not know stuff. That's kind of my attitude. I love living in a world where there's things we don't know what's going on.
Absolutely.
I know a lot of people that makes some people uncomfortable. We know it all. Darn it, but no, I don't think we do. There's a lot.
No, we don't.
But let's continue to do these shows and have these discussions because it's fun to come up with theories and speculate and share different ideas about it. So.
Well, I got one last question for you, and from Marla, she asked, do you believe in a Bigfoot UFO connection?
I have not personally seen enough evidence to really, to consider that to be relevant. And in fact, this is interesting. I read a survey in a book recently, and this is a book from the early 80s that I was just kind of revisiting. So out of 1,000, a sample base of 1,000 Bigfoot reports, there were only 30 that had these kind of UFO connection allegations. This is just a random sample size from that time period, the early 80s, and before the 70s. So in essence, 3%. So 3% of your standard Bigfoot sighting has any type of UFO reference, link, accusation, which is, if you're going to look at this stuff scientifically, that's a pretty low percentage. That's not something you would emphasize if you're testing a theory or trying to do an experiment. You're not going to say, well, let's focus on this UFO angle because 3 out of every 100 people say that it's happening, so it's like, 97% are saying it walked across the road and it went in the woods, or it was hiding behind that tree and then it went up that hill. And, those are all perfectly natural. It's an animal, not an extraterrestrial, ultraterrestrial. So I don't think that, but guys like, Stan Gordon, I mean, he's been researching since the early 70s. He has the best evidence that there could be a connection. He's documented he makes a strong argument.
When I think of it, I think of that case with Stan. I think of the Presque Isle case up near Erie.
Yeah.
And I also was involved in an habituation up in northern Nova Scotia.
Okay.
Where the individual saw one of these Sasquatch actually coming out of a craft. Now, I'm just saying that's what he told me,
They do exist. I mean, we're not denying that those accounts do exist. All I'm saying is that they make up a microcosm of
I have not heard many of
evidence.
Them. Yeah, that's all I've ever heard. So I agree with you. Yeah, there are not many accounts of it, but when they do pop up, they are interesting.
They're fun to talk about, but I don't think there's a connection there. But I'm open-minded.
I agree with you.
You keep saying that, but it's true. If someone shows me definitive proof that they do come out of UFOs, I will readily accept that and say, okay, I was wrong. That's where they're coming from.
Well, okay, Ken. What's going on with Ken? What's coming up with you in the near future?
Oh gosh, I have 15 public appearances coming up this year around the country.
COVID's over.
If I have time to, I don't know if they're coming back. I'll be speaking at the Mothman Festival in September up in Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be at the Texas Bigfoot Conference and Minnesota Bigfoot Conference in October. I'm speaking at the first ever Alabama Bigfoot Conference in June. 2 times in Tennessee in the Smoky Mountains. Gosh, what else? I'm speaking at the Haunted America Conference in Alton, Illinois at the end of June.
Mm-hmm.
There's a new conference in Missouri. Sorry, I just booked this one. But so I'm going to be traveling around a lot. Michigan, Tennessee, Arkansas, Alabama. So I'll be, around mostly the eastern U.S. But if anyone wants to come out, I'll be doing lectures, presentations. I always have autographed copies of my books, DVDs. I always love talking to people, meeting people, and hearing about their opinions and experiences. And so, and I've also been working on some television shows. I currently can be seen on the History Channel series The Proof Is Out There, which airs on Friday nights after Ancient Aliens. We're coming up on we just got picked up for season 3. So I'm just one of many commentators, but there's a lot of good people that contribute to that show. And also I've got some upcoming appearances on Unexplained with William Shatner as well.
Good. Well, maybe you and I will physically hook up sometime. I missed you once before, but one day it'll happen.
Definitely, brother. I wish there were more events. I have a lot of fans and followers up in the Northeast, and they're always saying, when are you going to come up here to the Northeast, the Atlantic coast? Or I was like, man, I would come if there was an event, but it just seems like everyone's booking them in Ohio, Michigan, and Tennessee. I mean, Kentucky. Yeah. There are certain states, Pennsylvania to some extent gets all the events, and they just, we need some more in Maryland, Virginia, New England, Absolutely. New York. I mean, whatever, Connecticut. I'd love to go. So,
well, I appreciate you coming on and doing this. It was great to talk to you again, and I'm quite sure our listeners are very appreciative of you taking the time. So until next time, you take care. Have a great weekend, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you, Lon. Thanks again for having me on. Thanks for Vince for running the show, and great questions, everyone. So I saw some great comments and questions, so I really appreciate everyone that kind of got involved in the discussion tonight. Let's do it again.
Take care.
All right, take care. Bye.
Good night. Now, if you have an unexplained encounter or sighting, feel free to contact me directly at Lon Strickler at phantomsandmonsters.com or through the Phantoms and Monsters blog site. Also, if you would like to like your encounter or sighting read on the show, please forward to my email. This is something that Vince and I are working on, and we will start presenting these shows live in short time. So, we'll give you plenty of notice on when this is going to happen. So I want to again thank Ken Gerhard for coming on this evening and answering these questions. It was great. I really enjoyed this. And thanks to each and all of you for watching and chatting. If you made a super chat donation, it's truly appreciated. Your support is what makes all this possible. And please click the subscribe button and also become a member of the Phantoms and Monsters Radio. My new book, Mean Humanoids, Modern Myths Are Real Monsters, is now available on Amazon. So next week, we will be continuing our roundtable series with an alien encounters discussion. The guest list is still in the works, but I promise you that you won't be disappointed. So be sure to tune in for that. So until next week, stay healthy and have a safe, enjoyable weekend. Good night.